Okay, today's topic is how can we rise from our failures to prosper? As we enter into this new year, perhaps you will have in your minds some of the episodes that happened in the past year, some of the failures, so to speak. Some things happened that reminded you that you are not good enough. And these failures or tribulations weigh on your heart. Some of these miscalculations, the mistakes that you have made, it weighs on your heart. And they keep you from progressing into new endeavors, new hope, new projects. And you were telling yourself, if I can't do this well, how can I do that well? And you start to limit yourself, and you start to condemn yourself. Today, we will look at how Joshua, who faced failures and setbacks, and how he rose over these failures and prospered. So Moses went and spoke these things to all Israel. He said to them, I am 120 years old today. I am no longer able to come and go, and the Lord has said to me, you shall not cross this Jordan. So it is the Lord your God who will cross ahead of you. He will destroy the nations before you, and you shall dispossess them. Now Joshua shall take over. And Joshua is the one who will cross ahead of you, just as the Lord has spoken. And the Lord will do to them just as he did to Sihon and Og, the kings of Amorites, and to their land when he destroyed them. The Lord will deliver them up before you, and you shall do to them according to the commandments which I have commanded you. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or tremble at them. For the Lord your God is the one who goes with you. He will not fail you or forsake you. Now Moses was 120 years old, and the Lord had prevented him from crossing over into the promised land. And hence Moses commanded the people to take up courage under Joshua's leadership. So Joshua, being the new leader of Israel, will have to step out of Moses' shadow and prove himself as a worthy leader, worthy of the mantle of Moses. Not long after Joshua took over the leadership, Israel met their first defeat at the city of Ai. Never have they suffered casualty in any battles. This time, 36 people died, and the battle was badly planned. And they went to war not knowing that God was angry and was no longer with them. Joshua was reckless and complacent on two fronts. Firstly, he carelessly presumed that every Israelite has complied to the commandments of God not to take anything from Jericho. Secondly, he underestimated the military prowess of Ai and botched the attack. And that resulted in Israel's first defeat in the life of the nation. Because Joshua did not consult God, God was angry and refused to talk to them. Thus Joshua humbled himself by putting ash on his head and sought the Lord from morning till evening. So after God had spoken, Joshua realized his mistakes. And what is Joshua's mistakes? He presumed and did not verify. He presumed that everyone heard the commandments of God, but he did not verify that whether it was so. Number two, he was complacent because Ai is smaller than Jericho. Indeed, if Joshua would have consulted the Lord at every turn, then this would not happen. After the incident, the news of how Israel destroyed Jericho and Ai spread through the surrounding nations. This is a very common problem. Very, very common problem. Presumption and complacence. We can ask God in every situation concerning the plans ahead? Do I understand the issues enough? This is the question we ask. Do we understand the circumstances enough rather than to presume that everything is all right? Or we can ask the questions, are my plans good enough? Rather than to keep thinking and thinking and thinking that your plans are either good enough or not good enough. So after asking God these questions, we give it some time for God to speak. So when we ask God the question, God will speak to us. He will take his time to speak to us. Now, after Joshua has repented, God returned to them, gave them a battle plan, and they conquered Ai without casualties. Then the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai. They also acted craftily and set out, as envoys. And they took worn-out sacks on their donkeys and wineskins, worn out and torn and mended, worn-out patched sandals on their feet, and worn-out clothes on themselves, and all the bread of their provisions was dry and had been crumpled. They went to Joshua, to the camp of Gilgal, and said to him and to the men of Israel, and they said, your servants have come from a very far country because of the fame of the Lord your God, for we have heard the report of him and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of Amorites were beyond Jordan, to Sihon the king of Heshbon, and Og king of Bashan, who was at Ashtaroth. So our leaders, our elders, and all the inhabitants of our country spoke to us, saying, take provisions in your hand for the journey, and go meet them and say that we are your servants now. Make a covenant with us. And this is our bread, which was warm when we took it for our provisions and out of our houses on the day that we left to come to you. And now, behold, it is dry and has become crumpled. These wineskins which we filled were new, and behold, they were torn, and these our clothes and sandals are worn out because of the very long journey. So the men of Israel took some of their provisions and did not ask for the counsel of the Lord. So Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live. And the leaders of the congregation swore an oath to them. So for the second time, Joshua did what was right in his own eyes without seeking God's counsel. And 3 days later, Joshua heard that there were neighbors. The Gibeonites were neighbors and were living within their land. But it was all too late, for Joshua could not reverse the covenant that he had made with them. So, and the Israelites grumbled against Joshua and the leaders, which I can understand. So Joshua made the Gibeonites slaves, hewers of wood, drawers of water for Israel forever. But they lost the land. They could not capture the land from the Gibeonites. So God was angry because Joshua overestimated his own powers of observation and reasoning. Subsequently, he was unable to see through the Gibeonites' lies and was deceived. Indeed, only God can see the secrets and motives of the heart. As a result, it affected Joshua's credibility before the people, and Israel had to live with a thorn on their side forever. Joshua again humbled himself before God and the people, acknowledging his mistake. Because Joshua repented and did not justify himself, God forgave Joshua and returned to walk with Israel. So what are Joshua's mistakes this time? Joshua's mistake, he concluded the matter before consulting the Lord. Now this is again a very common mistake. As a result, we were deceived. People often look at appearances and emotions take over. However, in matters like that, we can always ask God, how much can we believe what they have said. So when we converse with people that are important, after the conversation, we can ask God, how much can we believe what they have said? It is not a yes or no, but how much can we believe? Then we have to dwell in what they say. We have to talk about what they say. Is this what they say true? Is that what they say true? Or are they genuine? Are they sincere? These are the questions we can bring before God. Now, they have made the covenant with Gibeon, the Gibeonites, and they can't turn back the clock. Then we see the 5 kings who are friends, formerly friends with Gibeon. They came together and wanted to punish Gibeon. Therefore, Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, sent word to Hoham, king of Hebron, and to Piram, king of Jarmuth, and to Japhia, king of Lachish, and to Debir, king of Eglon, this is 5 kings, saying, come up to me and help me, and let us attack Gibeon. For it has made peace with Joshua and with the sons of Israel. Then the men of Gibeon sent word to Joshua to the camp of Gilgal, saying, do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us, for all the kings of the Amorites that live in the hill country have assembled against us. You see, when Israel signed a covenant with Gibeon, they also inherit their problem. So when Joshua went up from Gilgal, and all the people of the war with him, and all the valiant warriors, the Lord said to Joshua, do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not one of them shall stand before you. So Joshua came upon them suddenly by marching all night from Gilgal. And the Lord confounded them before Israel, and he slew them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, pursued them by the way of the ascent of Beth Horon, and struck them as far as Azekah and Makkedah. So now we can see that Joshua had learned from his mistakes again. He sought God's counsel, and the God responded with his blessings. Do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not one of them shall stand before you. So when we seek the Lord's counsel, and we hear him replying, we also acquire the Lord's blessing and favor. So the enemies fled. And as they fled before Israel, the Lord threw large stones from heaven on them, and they died. And there were more who died from the hailstones than from those whom the sons of Israel killed with the sword. And they were fighting. Then Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day, when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the sons of Israel, and he said in the sight of Israel, O sun, stand still at Gibeon, and O moon in the valley of Aijalon. So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, until the nation avenged themselves of their enemies. Is it not written in the book of Jasher? And the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. So there's no day like that before it or after it, when the Lord listened to the voice of a man, Joshua, for the Lord fought for Israel. So Joshua caused the sun and the moon to stand still for a whole day so that they can destroy the enemy before nightfall. Here Joshua learned that all things are possible with God, even though Joshua had failed badly as a leader. But God did not remember his failures. Instead, God saw Joshua's humility and his determination to learn and to rise up from where he had fallen. Hence, God gave Joshua the authority comparable to Moses' work of miracles. Joshua was the only man in world history that stopped the sun from moving for a whole day. So I encourage you not to let the failures of the past year stop you from doing things that seemed impossible. So how did Joshua rise above his past failures? Number one, Joshua was not affected by how others perceive him. He is only concerned about how God perceives him. Therefore, we must surround ourselves with people who perceive us the way that God perceives. People will remind us of our past failures. They always do. They will always remind us of who we were. But God will keep telling us, God will keep telling you of who you will become. So the people grumbled against Joshua rightly because of his mistakes. But Joshua was surrounded by those who would encourage him with God's promises. So Jesus encourages his disciples. Say, greater works you shall do because I go to the Father. Whereas the Pharisees and the others keep reminding the disciples that they are just mere fishermen. So we need to keep hearing from God of what God thinks of us. Because if we do not, then we will open our ears to those who look down on us, to those who belittle us. Now, Moses is over 80 years old, but his strength is a lot greater than those who are in their 30s. So let not age hinder you from doing great things. Do not fear, the Lord says. I am with you to do the impossible. Even though many of us are still in our problems, that does not mean that we have failed. But it's our attitude of humility and self-reflection that will bring God near to us. Number two, Joshua was not fixated on being perfect, but on having a perfect attitude. And what is this perfect attitude? It's humility and self-reflection. Perfection always comes at the back of a perfect attitude. So Joshua was not motivated by pride to be perfect all the time. But rather he had a perfect attitude, which is humility and self-reflection. At every situation, Joshua sought to learn from his imperfection. Hence, we don't see Joshua regretting over his mistakes, of how his failures in AI, of his failures including Gibeon, making a covenant with Gibeon. We don't see Joshua regretting over his mistakes. If your work is perfect all the time, that will only mean that the tribulations that you face, the degree of difficulty in them is too low. It is only when I face great difficulties that I fail and make mistakes, but I learn from it. Therefore, do not ask God for a smooth path, but rather for a challenging path, a path that is not easy to walk, so that we may grow. So do not be fixated on perfection, doing everything perfectly, being not scolded by people, not being rebuked by people, criticized by people. But focus on having a perfect attitude, because it is in having a perfect attitude that God is pleased. Number three, Joshua was not fixated on achievement, but on being faithful. On the day of judgment, God judges our faithfulness and obedience to Him. not achievement. So on the day of judgment, will God say to us, I'm very glad to see you, Amanda, because you are a great achiever and you are successful. Well, I think the Lord would say, my good and faithful servant. The way the world views or perceives success is different from the way God perceives it. The world sees how you are being promoted, how you have grown in wealth and size, and how you have owned houses at such a young age. That is how it is with the world. But God sees achievement as not in promotion or wealth, but God sees achievement in faithfulness to His commands, as being obedient. Faithfulness to His mission, His plans, and commands. You may see yourself as a mediocre, but God sees you as faithful and good. Joshua did not focus on what he had lost, but what he would gain if he learned from his failures. So whenever he failed, he did not focus on what he has lost, but he focused on what he has gained through wisdom. And some of us has lost much. We have lost in our businesses, we have lost in our families, we have lost so many things, and when we look back at those things, we regret at our loss. But don't look back at those things, but rather look at what a good and faithful servant you have become. Because you have come on this earth not to experience wealth, riches, and blessing. You have come to this earth to experience what it is like to be betrayed, what it is like to lose, what it is like to fail. And that is the reason why Jesus came. And that made him a glorious person as a result. Therefore, it is expedient to learn from failures in small battles in order to win the war. In order to win the war, we have to learn about the failures in small battles. So remember, when we have failed, you always remember that we will win in the war. We do not hear Joshua talking about his losses. We don't hear that. But we see Joshua growing and never repeating the same mistakes. One sure way to rise above our failures is to learn from them. It is when we do not learn from our failures, that's where we felt that we have lost. The more we learn from our failures, the more we look past them. It is better to learn from small mistakes than from big ones. Now, in conclusion, whether in triumph or in defeat, Jesus had a perfect attitude of humility. For he obeyed the Father's plans at every step. And hence God turned Jesus' failures into victory by raising him to his right hand. You may feel that your life is a failure, but because you tried your very best to follow God's will, He will exalt you. Do not try to be seen as successful, but be faithful to what God has called you to. Be faithful to God is to help those who are in need, to heal the sick, to educate the young, to help the poor, to minister to those who are lost. To help is to give until you feel the pain and the inconvenience for the sake of others. So when we feel pain, we think about how others has felt even more pain in their predicament, and you will be moved to help them. In so doing, you will be able to look past your failures and to become a more faithful person this year. So when we meet the Lord on the day of rapture, the Lord is going to flash in front of you all the people that you have helped, all the good things that you have done. Only what is done for Christ will be brought up and be mentioned and be rewarded. But everything else that we do only for ourselves, in selfishness, it shall never be mentioned. So, a person who is a high achiever is a person truly who walks in the will of God, who puts the community, the needs of the community before our own. Amen? Praise the Lord. Let us sing the last Chinese song. I want to sing the last Chinese song. All right? And while we have the Holy Communion.